The scent of white roses, my husband's favorite, filled the quiet living room. It was a scent I had always associated with love, with anniversaries, with the simple, beautiful life we had built together. But tonight, it smelled like a funeral. A single, tall white candle flickered on the mantelpiece, its flame dancing beside a silver-framed photograph of my Arthur, his kind, crinkly-eyed smile frozen in time. It was the first anniversary of his death, a day of quiet, sacred, and deeply personal grief. My son, Daniel, and I were sitting on the sofa, an old photo album open between us. It was a pilgrimage through our shared history, a quiet act of remembrance. I had just turned a page to a faded photograph of a young Arthur, proudly holding up a tiny, squirming, newborn Daniel. A tear escaped my eye and fell onto the plastic film protecting the picture. Daniel reached out and gently squeezed my hand. "I miss him too, Mom," he whispered, his own voice thick with emotion. In that moment, we were united in our grief, two halves of a heart that had been broken. And then, the door to the living room opened, and my daughter-in-law, Olivia, walked in. She was not there to grieve. Her face, usually so perfectly composed, was a mask of cold, righteous fury. She did not look at the flickering candle. She did not look at the photograph of the man whose memory we were honoring. She looked at me, her eyes as hard and as cold as river stones. "How long?" she began, her voice slicing through the peaceful, sorrowful silence. "Are you going to keep up this pathetic act?" Daniel and I looked up at her, stunned. "What?" Daniel stammered. "Olivia, what are you talking about?" "This," she spat, gesturing around the room with a sweep of her hand. This sad little performance of the grieving widow. The flickering candle, the photo albums, the crocodile tears. "We all know you're just putting on a show so you can keep your claws in his money." "No shame, Nandinas." The cruelty of the words was so breathtaking, so utterly out of place in this sacred moment, that my mind simply refused to process them. It felt like a scene from a bad television show, not a conversation happening in my own living room. She strode forward and snatched the photo album from my lap. The old book fell to the floor with a heavy, defeated thud. "My lawyer tells me that your claim to this house is weak," she continued, her voice rising with a terrible, triumphant energy. "He says that since I was managing Dad's finances for the last 2 years of his life, a judge will see that he intended for me to be the true heir. You've been living off this family for years, pretending to be a saint. But you're a thief, and you are faking your grief to steal what is rightfully ours." She took a step closer, her face contorted with a hatred that was terrifying in its intensity. "This is my house now, my family's house, and you are no longer welcome here. Get out. Get out." The same 2 words, it seems, that all betrayed mothers eventually hear. Daniel was on his feet now, his face a mask of horrified disbelief. "Olivia, have you lost your mind? This is my mother. This is her home." "No, Daniel," she said, turning her cold eyes on him. "This was your father's home, and you, in your weak, sentimental grief, are letting this woman steal it from you. From us, from our children." She pointed a trembling finger at the door. "I want her out, tonight." And in that moment, as I looked at my son's confused, crumbling face and my daughter-in-law's monstrous, triumphant one, a strange cold and utterly unexpected clarity pierced through the fog of my shock. I did not feel fear. I did not feel despair. I felt a quiet, almost pitying sense of disappointment in her, not just in her cruelty, but in her staggering, amateurish stupidity. My Arthur, her brilliant, meticulous lawyer of a father-in-law, had seen this coming, and he had prepared for it. The fortress he had built to protect me was not just made of love. It was made of ironclad, unassailable, and utterly brilliant legal documents. And this foolish, greedy woman, in her haste to stage a coup, had just walked directly into a trap of her own making. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. I looked at my daughter-in-law, and for the first time, I did not see the beautiful, charming woman I had once loved. I saw a clumsy, second-rate con artist who was about to be destroyed by a master. Hi everyone, I'm Grandma Clara. I'm 72 years old. And on the first anniversary of my husband's death, my daughter-in-law accused me of being a thief and a liar and threw me out onto the street. She thought it was the end of my story. She had no idea it was the beginning of hers. The secret I am sharing with you today is a story of a husband's foresight and a wife's revenge. You see, the secret is not that I had the means to fight back. The secret is that my beloved husband, from his grave, had already laid out the entire battle plan for me. Olivia thought she was a brilliant strategist, a queen on a chessboard. She had no idea she was just a pawn in a game her dead father-in-law had already won, years before she had even thought to play it. She had her lawyer. But I had my Arthur, and it was not going to be a fair fight. So please, get comfortable. This is a story about a woman who was pushed too far. It is a story about a quiet, grieving widow who was forced to become a warrior. And it is the story of how I, armed with my husband's love and his brilliant legal mind, reclaimed my home, my dignity, and my life. Your support, your likes and subscriptions, Tossilent Grandma, are a quiet salute to a battle well fought and a victory well won. To understand the sheer, breathtaking audacity of Olivia's power play, you must first understand the 15 years of meticulous, patient, and utterly convincing deception that preceded it. You have to understand the perfect mask she wore, and the kind, trusting, and tragically blind family that fell for it. My son Daniel is a good man. He is a professor of English literature, a man who lives in a world of poetry, of ideas, of quiet, academic contemplation. He has a heart that is as big and as open as a summer sky. But he is a man who has never had to fight for anything in his life. My husband, Arthur, and I, we made sure of that. Arthur was one of the top litigators in the state, a man who had built a formidable career and a substantial fortune through his brilliant mind and his relentless work ethic. We gave Daniel a life of quiet, understated privilege, a life where the bills were always paid, where the opportunities were always abundant, and where the harsh, sharp edges of the world were always kept at a safe, comfortable distance. We didn't spoil him with extravagance, but we spoiled him with security. He never learned the language of financial anxiety, of professional jealousy, of the quiet, desperate struggles that define most people's lives. He was, and is, a man who is tragically and beautifully naive. And then he met Olivia. She was a student in one of his graduate seminars on Victorian poetry. She was brilliant, beautiful, and she seemed to understand the deepest, most complex corners of his soul. She was not like the other women he had dated, women who were often intimidated by his intellect or bored by his quiet nature. Olivia was his intellectual equal, his passionate partner in a world of ideas. She could quote Keats and Shelley. She could debate the finer points of postmodern theory. She could listen for hours as he spoke of the tragic beauty of Tennyson. She was, in short, the answer to my son's every prayer, and to mine. She was the perfect daughter-in-law. She was endlessly deferential to me and to Arthur. She called us Mom and Dad from the very beginning. She would sit in Arthur's study for hours, listening to his stories of his early days as a young, struggling lawyer, her face a mask of rapt, intelligent fascination. She would help me in the kitchen, her hands, surprisingly, as skilled as my own, as we prepared the Sunday dinners that had been the cornerstone of our family life for decades. She remembered our birthdays, our anniversary, our favorite foods, our favorite flowers. She wove herself into the fabric of our family with a skill that was so seamless, so perfect, that it never once occurred to us that she was not a part of the original cloth. The first, and perhaps most brilliant, phase of her long con was the financial takeover. It began subtly, a few years after she and Daniel were married. Arthur was beginning to slow down. His health was good, but the management of their complex portfolio of investments was becoming a chore for him. Olivia, who had a degree in art history but also, she claimed, a natural head for numbers, offered to help. "Dad, you shouldn't be worrying about this stuff," she would say, her voice full of a sweet, loving concern. "You should be enjoying your retirement." Let me take care of the boring paperwork. I can create spreadsheets. I can track the dividends. I can talk to the financial planners. It would be my pleasure, my gift to you and Mom, for everything you've done for us. And Arthur, a man who could dissect the most complex legal argument, but who found tax forms to be a form of exquisite torture, had gratefully, foolishly agreed. Over the next few years, Olivia became the de facto chief financial officer of the Miller family. She had all the passwords, all the account numbers, all the contacts. She would sit with us once a month, presenting us with beautiful color-coded charts and graphs that showed the steady, impressive growth of our assets. We were so impressed by her competence, so grateful for her help, that we never once thought to question her. We never thought to look at the actual bank statements. We just trusted her. We trusted the beautiful, loving, and brilliant daughter who was taking such wonderful care of us in our old age. It was during the last year of Arthur's life, as his heart began to fail, that the first, tiny, almost imperceptible hairline cracks began to appear in Olivia's perfect facade. They were small things, moments of strange, out-of-character behavior that I had registered as odd, but had immediately dismissed, explaining them away as the product of the immense stress and grief she was under. There was her strange, almost obsessive interest in the will. Arthur and I had simple, straightforward wills. We left everything to each other, and then to Daniel upon the second death. But Olivia was insistent that we needed to modernize them. She had long private conversations with our estate lawyer. She would emerge from these meetings with new, complex documents, full of talk of trusts and tax shelters, and something she called a generation-skipping transfer. "It's just to protect the assets, Mom," she would explain, her voice full of a brisk, professional confidence. "To make sure the government doesn't take it all in taxes. To make sure there's a legacy left for the grandchildren." It all sounded so sensible, so responsible. I had no idea that she was not trying to protect the assets from the government. She was trying to create a legal structure that would allow her to control them herself. Then, there were the arguments. They were quiet, hushed, and always happened behind closed doors. But I could hear them. I could hear the low, angry murmur of Arthur's voice, and the high, sharp, defensive hiss of Olivia's. I would ask Arthur about them later, but he would just shake his head, a look of deep, weary sadness in his eyes. "It's nothing, Kate," he would say. "Just a disagreement about investments. Don't you worry your pretty head about it." I know now that he was trying to protect me. He had begun to see the darkness in her, the cold, ruthless greed, and he did not want it to touch me. The final warning, the one I will regret ignoring for the rest of my life, came a month before he died. He was weak, his body failing, but his mind, that brilliant legal mind, was as sharp as ever. He called me to his bedside one evening. He was holding a small, old-fashioned brass key in his hand. "Kate," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp, "I want you to take this, and I want you to listen to me very, very carefully." He told me about the key, about the secret safe deposit box he had opened under a corporate name. He told me that inside the box, there was another will, his true, final will. He did not tell me what was in it. He just made me promise. "If anything happens," he said, his eyes locking onto mine, his grip surprisingly strong. "If you ever, for any reason, feel that you are not safe, that you are not being respected in your own home, I want you to take this key. I want you to go to that box. And I want you to do exactly what the documents inside tell you to do. Do you understand me, Catherine? Do you promise me?" I had looked at his face, his dear, beloved face, now so thin and pale, and my heart had broken. I thought he was delirious. I thought the medication was making him paranoid. The idea that Olivia, our Olivia, the daughter who was so lovingly caring for him, could ever be a threat to me was so monstrous, so unthinkable, that I could not entertain it for a moment. "Of course, my love," I had said, my voice a soothing lie. "I promise. Now you just rest." I took the key from him, and I put it in my jewelry box, a strange secret object from a conversation I was already trying to forget. A month later, he was gone. And on the day of his funeral, as I stood there, a homeless, grieving widow, accused of murder by my own daughter, his words came back to me, a ghostly, terrible, and prophetic echo. If you ever feel that you are not safe. I had not been safe for a very long time. I just hadn't been brave enough to admit it. My husband, from his grave, had just given me a second chance. He had given me a key. And I knew, with a certainty that was as cold and as clear as the grave itself, that it was time to find the lock. The day after Arthur's funeral was a gray, drizzling, miserable Tuesday. The house was suffocatingly quiet, the scent of 1,000 funereal flowers still hanging heavy in the air. I woke up that morning, feeling like a ghost in my own life, a hollowed-out vessel of grief. I put on my dressing gown, my movements slow and heavy, and made my way downstairs, my only thought a desperate, primal need for a cup of hot, strong tea. I found Olivia in the kitchen. She was not grieving. She was redecorating. She was standing in the center of the room, a measuring tape in her hand, talking animatedly on her phone. No, a full Viking range will fit if we just knock out this wall here, she was saying, her voice bright and full of a terrifying, energetic purpose. And I'm thinking a Calcutta marble island. Something really dramatic. She saw me standing in the doorway, and her face did not register sympathy or concern. It registered annoyance, as if I were a piece of old, inconvenient furniture she hadn't yet figured out where to store. "Morning, Clara," she said, her tone brisk and businesslike. "I'm just getting a head start on the kitchen remodel. This place is so dated." I stared at her, my mind struggling to bridge the chasm between my own profound, soul-crushing grief and her cheerful, callous discussion of marble countertops. "A remodel?" I whispered. "Olivia, Arthur was buried yesterday." She sighed, a long, impatient, put-upon sigh. "Clara, let's be practical. Life goes on. Arthur wouldn't want us to sit around moping. He would want us to improve the property value." She turned back to her phone call. "I'll call you back," she said, and hung up. She then turned to me, her face settling into a mask of what I can only describe as predatory sympathy. "Look," she said, her voice softening into a tone one might use with a difficult child. "I know this is hard for you, but you have to understand, things are going to be different now. I've been managing the finances for years. I know what's best for this family's assets. And this house is our most valuable asset." Maiden. That was the first time she used the word our. Not your. Not Dad's. And if the next few weeks were a slow, creeping, and deeply insidious nightmare. It was a campaign of psychological warfare designed to make me feel like a stranger, a guest, a burden in my own home. My things began to disappear. A small porcelain vase my mother had given me vanished from the mantelpiece. A worn, comfortable armchair in the living room, the one Arthur had always sat in, was replaced by a sleek, uncomfortable leather thing that looked like it belonged in a therapist's waiting room. When I asked about these things, Olivia would give me a bright, dismissive smile. "Oh, that old thing? I put it in storage in the basement. It was just cluttering up the place." My home was being systematically erased, and I was being erased along with it. She began to intercept my mail, piling it on a corner of the kitchen counter, claiming she was helping me stay organized. I know now she was looking for bank statements, for insurance policies, for any document that would give her a clearer picture of the prize she was so determined to claim. She began to manage my social life. When my friends would call, Olivia would often answer the phone. "Oh, Clara's just resting," she would say, her voice full of a false, sweet concern. "She's just so tired these days. It's probably not a good time for a visit." My friends, concerned for my well-being, stopped calling as often. My world, which had once been so full of love and friendship, began to shrink until the only person I saw for days on end was my smiling, ever helpful, and deeply terrifying jailer. "Daniel, my dear, sweet and utterly blind son, saw none of this. He saw a loving, competent wife who was taking care of his grieving, fragile mother. Olivia was a master manipulator, and she played him like a finely tuned violin. She would be endlessly patient and loving with me in his presence, only to turn on me with a look of cold, reptilian contempt the moment he left the room. The final, brutal escalation came on the anniversary of Arthur's death. The confrontation in the living room was not a spontaneous outburst. It was a planned, strategic attack. She had waited for a moment when I was at my most vulnerable, my heart already raw with grief. She had waited for a moment when she could frame my sorrow as a manipulative performance, and she had delivered her lines with the precision of a seasoned actress. When she pointed to the door and screamed, "Get out!" I knew this was the end of the first act. But I also knew, with a certainty that was as cold and as clear as a winter star, that the second act was about to begin. And it would be written not by her, but by me. And by my husband. I did not argue. I did not protest. I simply looked at her, and then at my son, whose face was a mask of pale, helpless confusion. I walked out of the living room, up the stairs to my bedroom, and I packed a small overnight bag. I took my handbag, the one containing my wallet, my keys, and the small, old-fashioned brass key my husband had given me. As I walked down the stairs, Olivia was standing in the hallway, her arms crossed, her face a mask of triumphant victory. "I'll have the rest of your things sent to a storage unit," she said, her voice dripping with a cold, magnanimous poison. "You can have your lawyer contact my lawyer to arrange it." I walked past her, out the front door, and into the cold, dark night. I did not look back. I did not know where I was going. I just knew that I was not a victim. I was a woman on a mission. A mission my husband had given me from beyond the grave. My war had just begun. The week I spent at Eleanor's house was not a week of grieving. It was a week of metamorphosis. I arrived as a victim, a shattered, homeless widow. But with every page I turned of my husband's secret ledger, with every treacherous word I read in my daughter's letters, I felt the broken pieces of my heart being forged into something new. Something harder. Something colder. Something far more dangerous. The ledger was a testament to Arthur's brilliant, legal mind. It wasn't just a diary of his suspicions. It was a meticulously compiled case file. He had documented everything. He had cross-referenced Olivia's requests for money with secret withdrawals she was making from their managed accounts. He had noted her quiet sale of some of his antique law books, items she had claimed were donated to the university. He had even in the last month of his life hired his own private investigator, the very same Julian Croft I had read about in your other stories, to create a preliminary file on Marcus Thorne. My Arthur had not gone gentle into that good night. He had gone down swinging, building an arsenal for the wife he knew would have to fight a war on her own. The letters, tied with a pristine white ribbon that must have been a mockery of her own wedding vows, were the most painful part. They were a roadmap of her and Marcus's entire conspiracy. They detailed their plan to impress the Davenports, the family of her Giallo lover, it seemed, their frustration with my continued existence, their discussions of how to manage me after Arthur's death, and their plot to have me declared incompetent so they could gain full control of the estate. It was all there, in her own elegant, treacherous handwriting. With Eleanor and her lawyer, a sharp, sensible man named Mr. Gable, we spent the week building our case. We were a quiet, formidable war council. We were 3 senior citizens, a judge, a lawyer, and a wronged wife, and we were about to bring the full weight of our collective experience down upon the heads of 2 arrogant, greedy fools. Our plan was not to be fought in the court of public opinion. It was to be fought in the cold, quiet, and unforgiving theater of the law. We did not want to humiliate them in a newspaper. We wanted to destroy them in a conference room. The first step was to secure the final, irrefutable piece of evidence from the safe deposit box. The secret will. We knew that once we presented that, the game would be over. The second step was to lure them into a trap. We couldn't just summon them to a lawyer's office. Olivia was too smart for that. She would be suspicious. We had to create a scenario where she would believe she was the one in control, where she would walk into her own execution, thinking she was attending her coronation. The plan we devised was simple, and it was brutal. It used her own weapon, her faint concern for my well-being, against her. A week after I had left my home, Mr. Gable, my new lawyer, sent a formal letter to Olivia's lawyer. The letter was a masterpiece of legal deception. It stated that I, his client, had suffered a severe emotional breakdown as a result of the unfortunate events at my husband's funeral. It stated that I was currently in a fragile and confused state and was residing at an undisclosed therapeutic facility. The letter then stated that I, in my confused state, had come to realize that my daughter was right. I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs, and therefore I was prepared to sign over a full, durable power of attorney to my loving and capable daughter, Olivia. There was just one condition. Given the complexity of the estate, the signing had to be witnessed and executed by both my lawyer and hers in a formal meeting to ensure everything was legally sound. It was the perfect bait. We were offering her everything she had ever wanted on a silver platter. We were validating her narrative. We were confirming her victory. She believed she had successfully broken me, that the sentimental old fool had finally crumbled under the pressure. Her lawyer replied within the hour. They eagerly agreed. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday at Mr. Gable's office. The day of the meeting was the first day of the rest of my life. I did not dress as a victim. I wore a tailored, navy blue suit, a string of my mother's pearls, and a look of calm, quiet, and absolute resolve. Eleanor sat beside me, her presence a silent, formidable fortress. They arrived, Olivia and her husband, my son, Daniel. Olivia was triumphant. She wore a bright, expensive suit, her face a mask of solemn, concerned victory. She looked at me with a kind of pitying, condescending sympathy, the look of a queen bestowing a final, merciful glance upon a peasant. Daniel just looked tired. He looked like a man who had been dragged along on a journey he didn't quite understand, but was too weak to resist. The meeting began. Mr. Gable, a man with a gentle face and the heart of a shark, played his part to perfection. He spoke of my fragile state, of my desire to unburden myself, of my complete and total trust in my loving daughter. He slid the power of attorney documents across the polished conference table. "If you would just sign here, Olivia," he said, his voice a soft, gentle purr. Olivia picked up the expensive, gold-plated pen. She looked at me, a final, triumphant, and utterly merciless smile on her face, and she signed her name with a flourish. The moment the ink was dry, the play was over. Mr. Gable leaned back in his chair. The gentle, sympathetic lawyer vanished, replaced by the man my husband had called the sharpest legal mind in the state. "Thank you, Olivia," he said, his voice suddenly as cold and as hard as the marble floor. "You have just signed a document attesting to your mother's fragile and confused state of mind, a document we will now be using as evidence against you." Olivia's smile froze. "What?" she whispered. Mr. Gable did not answer her. He simply opened a large, leather-bound folder that had been sitting on the table. "Let's talk about the real reason we are here today," he said. "Let's talk about a man named Marcus Thorne." He slid the private investigator's report across the table. He slid across the copies of the letters, the transcripts of their conspiracy. He slid across the evidence of the secret bank accounts, the asset transfers, the plan to have me declared incompetent. With every page, the color drained from Olivia's face. She stared at the undeniable proof of her own treachery, her own monstrous greed. The beautiful, confident mask shattered, revealing the ugly, terrified face of a common criminal who had just been caught. Daniel stared at the papers, his face a mask of dawning, horrified comprehension. He looked at his wife, the woman he had loved and trusted, and he finally saw the stranger she truly was. "And finally," Mr. Gable said, his voice a low, final, and devastating blow, "let's talk about your father's will. His real will." He slid the final document across the table. The secret will. The one that disinherited her completely. The one that laid out her crimes in her own father's words. The one that gave her a single, difficult, and almost impossible path back to redemption. Olivia looked at the will, at her father's familiar, elegant signature at the bottom, and a sound escaped her lips, a terrible, guttural, animal sound of a soul that has just been utterly and completely destroyed. The game was over. The king, from his grave, had checkmated the treacherous queen. The aftermath was not a loud, dramatic explosion. It was a quiet, cold, and meticulously executed legal demolition. Olivia, stripped of her power, her secrets exposed, crumbled. She did not fight. She did not rage. She simply signed the papers Mr. Gable placed in front of her, her hand trembling, her face a blank mask of shock and utter defeat. She signed over the house. She signed the agreement to repay the money she had stolen from our accounts. And she signed the document that legally barred her from ever contacting me or my grandchildren again. Daniel, my son, was a ghost. He sat through the entire meeting in a state of stunned, silent horror. He watched as the woman he loved, the woman he had trusted completely, was revealed to be a monster. He watched as the life he had known was systematically dismantled by the quiet, irrefutable power of his own father's love. He did not look at me. He could not. The shame was too great. They left the office as two separate, broken people. The war was over, and there were no victors, only casualties. I did not return to my home immediately. The thought of sleeping in the bed that Olivia had shared with my son, of eating in the kitchen she had so coldly tried to claim as her own, was unbearable. I stayed with Eleanor for another week, a quiet period of healing and reflection. We were two old soldiers, two quiet warriors, who had fought our separate battles and had emerged, scarred but victorious. We would sit in her sun-drenched living room, drinking tea, talking for hours about our husbands, our children, our lives. We had become more than just friends. We were sisters in a war that so many women of our generation have had to fight in silence. When I finally did return to my home, it was with a sense of profound and deeply unsettling peace. The house was empty. Olivia and Daniel had moved out, taking their things with them. They had left the house in a state of immaculate, almost sterile, cleanliness, as if trying to erase any trace of their presence, of their betrayal. But the house was not empty of their ghosts. I saw them everywhere. I saw Olivia's triumphant smile in the reflection of the new, cold glass dining room table she had installed. I saw Daniel's sad, weak acquiescence in the worn armchair he had always sat in. I saw their children's laughter in the empty, silent garden. I knew then that I could not stay. This house, the house my husband had built for me, the house that had been the sanctuary of our love, had been desecrated. It was no longer a home. It was a crime scene. And so, I made a decision that was not born of anger or of revenge, but of a deep and deeply necessary need to heal. I called a realtor, a kind, sensible woman who had been a friend of mine for years, and I told her to sell the house. The sale of the house was the final, cleansing fire. It was a way of burning away the ghosts, of cauterizing the wound. The proceeds from the sale were substantial, and I knew exactly what I was going to do with them. I did not keep the money for myself. To do so would have felt like profiting from my own pain, from my husband's legacy. Instead, I used it to create a new legacy, a legacy of my own. I established the Arthur and Clara Miller Foundation for the support of abused women. It was a small, private foundation with a simple, clear mission: to provide financial support, legal aid, and safe housing for women who, like me, had found themselves homeless, betrayed, and fighting for their lives against the people who were supposed to love them the most. My life found a new purpose. I was no longer just a grieving widow. I was a philanthropist, a warrior, an advocate. I worked with a small team of lawyers and social workers, women who had dedicated their lives to this fight. I read the stories of the women who came to us for help. Stories of domestic abuse, of financial betrayal, of quiet, creeping, and soul-destroying emotional cruelty. My own story, which had felt so singular, so personal, was just one among thousands. I had thought I was fighting a private war. I realized now that I had stumbled onto a vast, secret, and brutal battlefield. My relationship with my son, Daniel, was the most painful casualty of the war. He did not contact me for months. I sent him letters, but they went unanswered. I knew that he was not angry with me. He was drowning in his own shame, his own grief, his own profound and devastating disillusionment. He had not just lost his wife. He'd lost his entire understanding of his own life, of his own family, of his own history. He was a man adrift in a sea of his own making, and I did not know if he would ever find his way back to shore. The first sign of life came on my birthday. A small, simple bouquet of white roses, my husband's favorite, arrived at my new, small and sunny apartment. The card was unsigned, but I knew who it was from. It was a small, silent, and deeply significant gesture. It was not an apology. It was not a plea for forgiveness. It was just a beginning. A few weeks later, he called. His voice was quiet, hesitant, and full of a pain that was almost unbearable to hear. We did not talk about what had happened. We did not talk about Olivia. We talked about books. We talked about poetry. We talked about the weather. It was a slow, careful, and deeply awkward dance of two people who were trying to find a new way to be in the same room together, a new way to be a mother and a son. So what is the final lesson from my year of living dangerously? It is that the greatest betrayals are not committed by our enemies, but by the people we love the most. The people we trust with our hearts, with our homes, with our lives. And it is that the deepest wounds are not the loud, dramatic ones, but the quiet, creeping, and invisible ones. The slow, systematic erosion of our dignity, of our self-worth, of our own sense of reality. I also learned that a husband's love, a true and deep and abiding love, does not end with his death. My Arthur, in his wisdom, in his foresight, in his profound and unwavering love for me, had given me the greatest gift a man can give his wife. He had not just given me his wealth. He had given me the weapons to defend myself. He had given me a roadmap out of the darkness. He had, from his grave, saved my life. My relationship with my son is a work in progress. It is a fragile, tender, and deeply precious thing. We are learning a new language, a language of honesty, of boundaries, of a quiet, respectful love that is not built on illusions, but on the hard, solid ground of a shared and deeply painful truth. I do not know if he will ever fully heal from the wounds his wife inflicted on him and on us. But I know that he is trying. And for a mother, that is everything. I have not heard from Olivia since that day in the lawyer's office. I do not know where she is. I do not know what has become of her. And I have come to realize, with a sense of profound and liberating peace, that I do not care. She is a ghost from a life that is no longer mine. Her story is over. And mine, my new quiet and deeply purposeful story, is just beginning. My life is full now, in a way it has never been before. It is not full of the echoing silence of a house that was no longer my home. It is full of the quiet, steady, and deeply satisfying hum of purpose. It is full of the voices of the women I am helping, the quiet warriors who are, like me, finding their way out of the darkness. It is full of the tentative, hopeful laughter of my son, a man who is slowly, painfully, and beautifully finding his way back to himself. Thank you for joining me on this journey. It has been a story of great betrayal, but also of a surprising and deeply healing love. Your support has been a constant source of strength. If my story has moved you, or given you the courage to fight your own battles, a like or subscription to Excellent Grandma would be a profound honor. Remember that you are not alone. There are armies of us, quiet warriors in quiet rooms, fighting our own secret wars. And remember that the greatest weapon we have is the truth. Do not be afraid to speak it. Do not be afraid to wield it. And do not ever, ever let anyone make you feel like a guest in your own home or a stranger in your own life. Be well and be brave. I'll see you in the next story. Love, Grandma Clara.